Good morning, everybody. My name's John Gregson. I'm Communications Manager, CSR, Health and Agriculture for Waitrose Supermarkets. Before we begin, just a little bit about me. That's me, last January in Kong on the west coast of Ireland. And I'm eating woodcock. That's our last evening traditional shoot dinner. We go over there with some friends every year, and we have a fabulous time. So I just want to emphasize to you all that I'm a shooter. Shooting's been a big part of my life since I was 9 years old. I'm a wildfowl and rough shooter by inclination, really. I edited the Shooting Times for a spell in the 1990s, and I've been at Waitrose for nearly 22 years. It was me that wrote our lead policy. So I'm the one who's responsible for our decision to ban lead from our game meat supply chain. I wanted to be clear about that because I want you to hear from me why we decided to do that. Now, this is not a presentation about shooting, it's a presentation about food. And that's really important. It isn't a lecture about guns or proof or pressure or even conservation, although conservation is a big part of this. It's about food, it's about what we eat, it's about what we as Waitrose sell. So, at Waitrose, we are the largest retailer of game in the UK by volume. We sell partridge, we sell pheasant, we sell wood pigeon, and all of those lines are supplied by a brilliant processor. We sell venison as well, but that's farm venison. We don't sell wild venison. And that's not that we have any objections to wild venison. It's just very hard when you're dealing with wild species to get the kind of carcass conformation we need when we put meat on shelf. We're proud of our game supply chain. I'm proud of our game supply chain. And we believe there's a huge amount of headroom in the game market. It's low fat, it's tasty meat, it's healthy, it's a good alternative to beef and chicken. And if you think about it, lots of criticism is sort of coming forward about industrial agriculture and the way that we are growing our appetites for white meat and the pressures that's putting on local ecosystems. So game is a really good alternative. And when people learn how to cook it properly, they do love it. We know that. Sales increase year on year. People like eating game. But there's an elephant in the room, and the elephant is lead. Now, I firmly believe that you knew that. You all will know that this is a problem. The thing about lead is there's no getting around the fact it's a toxic heavy metal with no agreed safe limits of consumption. What's more, leading scientists will tell you, and have told people for years, there's been evidence since 1983 that it poisons wildfowl extensively. It's a problem. Spent lead shot is an issue. Wildfowl and waders see the spent lead shot, they mistake it for grit, they consume it, they get lead poisoning, they die pretty horrible, slow, painful deaths. And that is a problem. That's a problem for all of us. And as we are lovers of nature and conservation and outdoor spaces and wildness and all the things that love of the shooting sports brings, we should be concerned about that. The other thing is, if you think about it, the deaths that we who use lead accidentally inflict on some of those species, some of those wildfowl species, they are exactly the kind of deaths that we have sought to prevent in our own species by banning lead from things such as paint and petrol, which has been done for many years. Lead pipes in houses banned many, many years ago. And actually, the dangers of lead in petrol were becoming clear in the 1930s. So we can't claim this is a new issue. We've known that lead is an environmental poison for well over a century. And yet, we continue to shoot with it. Last spring, I sat down and I worked out, very roughly, but probably not a bad approximation, that our own game supply chain alone in Waitrose puts about 65 tons of lead into the environment every year, every season. Now, we know that people argue about the total amounts of lead that shooting is responsible for, but a pretty conservative estimate is about 5,000 tons, and that's game shooting, clay shooting, target shooting, all of the shooting sports. And that's an extraordinary amount. That's an extraordinary amount of material that, as I said, has no accepted safe limits and is a poison that we're not even allowed to put in paint anymore. But we cheerfully eat it. Every time we consume game, that delicious looking roast pheasant, which actually looks really good, but every time we consume game, we eat a little bit of it. Even the best processors, and we've got the best processor in the business, can't get rid of everything. There's lead residue, there's lead fragments, there's bits of lead in game meat. We can't get rid of it, and that's a problem. And if you're in any doubt about this, look at what the Food Standards Agency says about game. So the Food Standards Agency says lead shot game. It says, and I'm going to read this, I know it's on the slide and you can see it, but I want to read this to really emphasise what's being said here by the department that's responsible for the safety of British food. It says, consuming lead is harmful. Health experts advise to minimise lead consumption as much as possible. Anyone who eats lead-shot game should be aware of the risks posed by consuming large amounts of lead, especially children and pregnant women. And they go on. Eating lead-shot game on a frequent basis can expose consumers to potentially harmful levels of lead. Those who eat lead-shot game should minimise the amount they eat, especially for small game and animals. So that is your pheasant, rabbit, partridge, pigeon, all of the stuff that we enjoy hunting, we enjoy shooting, and that we sell in our supply chain. Now, this may seem an obvious question, but it's one that I've wanted to ask a number of people over the last year or so, particularly some of those people who turned to me and said, lead's not a problem. Lead's the most ballistically efficient material. We shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be banning lead. And yet, simply put, we're a food business. We love game. We think there's headroom in the market. But can any supermarket continue to knowingly offer its customers any food that potentially contains a toxic metal with no agreed safe limits? Lead alternatives are getting better all the time. The answer to that question is no, we can't. Lead alternatives are getting better. We don't need lead. We don't need lead in the supply chain. But most commercial estates need a market for their game. And the presence of lead, I believe, makes that market uncertain going forward. It's really difficult, as this comes to the fore, to defend the presence of a toxic heavy metal within food. There's one thing I'd like to emphasise though. Earlier this year, when the shooting organisations got behind a lead ban and really stood up for it, which is brilliant and brave, and we know it's difficult being a membership organisation because you rely on your members to fund your organisation, and it's very difficult to go against what some of them may wish. It's hard, and it was a brave thing to do. But let's be clear about one thing, and this is not going to be very popular. We don't have 5 years to get rid of lead. We just don't. Our younger customers worry about lots of things, and I'll explain this in a minute. But attitudes across everybody are changing at pace. They're changing fast. People are worrying about the environment. They're worried about what's being done in their name. Now, I know this is some people will say, oh, you talk about TV now, TV is emotional, TV presents the emotional, not the scientific picture. But for anybody who hasn't seen it, I would recommend anybody gets onto BBC iPlayer and looks up this film that was broadcast this last Sunday as I'm recording this. It was a compelling, honest and scary look at the state of the world. David Attenborough, make no mistake, is a powerful voice. He can change attitudes in this country. And plastic bags is a great example of this. There were a myriad of documentaries over the last 10 years pointing out the issues of single-use plastic bags and plastic pollution in our seas, pointing out the dangers and the impacts on wildlife and all of that stuff that we now know. But his programme, Blue Planet, broadcast on the BBC into people's sitting rooms at 8 p.m. on a Sunday evening, changed our attitudes to single-use plastic bags overnight. He effectively killed the single-use plastic bag industry. He is a powerful voice. But what's really important to understand is he's right in what he says. Watch that programme, listen to what he's saying, try to take emotion out of it and understand that this is the state of the world we're in right now with our consumption and what we do, and people are worried about it. Customers are worried about it. And there's some very serious scientists who have looked at lead for many years. So you've got Debbie Payne, you've got Rhys Green, and Rhys Green worked here at the GWCT in the days of Dick Potts. These are not people who are trying to ban shooting. These are not people who are telling you you can no longer go shooting. These are people who are saying, go shooting, but be responsible, don't use lead. Lead is a poison. And Debbie has written some amazing papers on lead poisoning wildfowl and waterfowl. Compelling papers, honest papers, that do not deserve to be derided in the ways that I've heard some shooting people talk about them. This is hard science, and you know, Debbie and Rhys are the truth sayers in all this. The other thing is, as I said, we've got lots of headroom in the game market. There's lots of headroom. People like eating game, and I've heard some great ideas about how to increase the sales of game, from game ready meals to game-based snacks aimed at children. Brilliant. However, if you don't get rid of lead, can you imagine the conversation with a supermarket buyer if the general public begins to become aware of the lead issue in game? You are not going to land any new products at all, on any supermarket shelves as long as game is in game meat. It just won't happen. Nobody is going to accept a range of kids' snacks that may contain lead. It just isn't going to happen. And I want to talk to you about why that is. I want to talk to you about our new customers, our latest customers. And it's these guys. It's the millennials. These are our customers of the future. These are the young adults who came of age in the year 2000. Business models in retail are really simple. For our business to remain solvent, we need people to decide they want to buy what we sell. It's dead simple. It's really simple. But people have complex relationships with what they eat. Eating is a very visceral thing. You're taking food into your body, and people worry about the provenance of that food. They worry about the quality of that food. They worry about, if you're eating meat, the animals that provided that meat. They worry about the conditions in which they were raised. They worry about the environmental impact of how they were raised. And when we buy food, we're entering into a massive chain of trust. If you think about it, let's give an example outside a supermarket. If you go to your local garage and you're in a hurry and you buy a sandwich off the shelf and you consume that sandwich, the chain of trust that you have to have in that sandwich is extraordinary. You are trusting people you don't see. You're trusting businesses you've probably never heard of, and your health is in the hands of people you'll never meet. And once that trust is lost, it's very difficult to get back. People choose to trust you. You cannot make them trust you. And so customers keep coming back to us at Waitrose because we promise we'll have the best animal welfare. We promise our food will be great quality. It will not necessarily be the cheapest, but it'll be great quality. And we sell our food at what we firmly believe is a fair price. We need to maintain that trust. And in the game market, to me, lead is what we would call a trust breaker. Now, the millennials are an interesting bunch. And a lady called Eve Turow wrote a book looking at their food habits and their attitude to food. And she came with some really interesting facts. These slides are stolen from Eve, so I would just like to thank her, but I hope you find them interesting. Millennials spend unprecedented amounts of their income on food. So globally, 6 in 10 millennials go out to eat at least once a week. That's twice the percentage of the baby boomers who were born after World War II and grew up through the 60s. For the first time ever in the US, teens are spending more on food than clothing. And in the UK, baking, it's becoming a hobby. It's now more common among 25 to 34-year-olds than any other age group. So food is important. Millennials spend money on food. And of course, it's very difficult to talk about people as just an amorphous group, the millennials. But within these groups, there will be differences of opinion, there'll be different views, there'll be different attitudes. But this gives us an idea of a mean average of attitudes, if you like. This is important. This is important to what we're talking about this morning. Well, millennials are fearful. They worry about stuff. They worry about recession. They worry about Brexit. They 24-hour news. The appetite of rolling news for bad news really impacts them. They worry about hacking, climate change, techno stress. They're attached to their phones. They get their news, they get their attitudes, they get a lot of their views from social media. And 1/3 of young British women and 1 in 10 young British men suffer from panic attacks. 77% of British 18 to 24-year-olds are nomophobic. That means they fear being without their mobile phones. And anybody who's got kids who've got phones, I'm sure you'll recognise that. Millennials are sceptical. Slightly old data, but I've seen from 2017, but I've seen nothing that changes my view that this is the correct data. So the 2017 Edelman Trust Barometer revealed the largest ever drop in trust across institutions of government, business, media and NGOs. And you can't help but think, with the current political climate globally, that's not going to have improved. And the pandemic is going to have driven some of those attitudes even deeper. So 81% of US millennials believe large food brands pursue policies that make Americans less healthy. It's very difficult to argue with that. Very difficult indeed. Food is control. So kids are going after more plant-based diets. And that's not just because of the environment. It's because they want to eat healthier. And, you know, we saw lots of WHO research came out in 2015. It's sort of pointing out how bad sausages and bacon were for us, and that we should eat them in fairly limited quantities. And that kind of news hits home with this age group. So in 2006, 150,000 people in the UK opted for a plant-based diet. Right now, and this slide's a few months old, I would say that 542,000 number is low. I think you're probably looking at the upside of 1 million now on that number. So that's a massive increase, and close to half of all vegans are aged 15 to 34. 28% of Brits have reduced or limited their meat consumption in just the last 6 months. During lockdown, there's been a slight pickup, but actually, you know, those numbers are still pretty solid. And in the UK, volume sales of dairy-free products are growing. Sales of gluten-free products are growing. Now, whether people are gluten intolerant or just think they're gluten intolerant, people are deciding to take things that they perceive as harmful out of their diets, and that's really important. Food is control, and we're seeing this. Millennials are calling for transparency, and I actually think they're not just calling for transparency, they're calling for radical transparency. So they want to know the provenance of everything, and they want simplicity, and they want to understand things, and they want to control things. And, you know, they want to be able to simplify things. And that's key to this age group. And with these kinds of challenges, this is why we worry about lead. Lead is such an outlier for the whole food industry. And food is identity. It's a format for self-branding. Many of you will have seen people in restaurants taking pictures of their food to post it on Instagram, Snapchat, whatever their social media platform of choice is. Food labels allow self-expression. Are you a vegan? Are you against GMOs? Do you eat a raw diet? Are you flexitarian? Are you vegetarian? Are you vegan? All of these labels give people, help them with their sense of identity. And at the end of the day, it's about how people want to be seen. How do most millennials want to be seen? And like all of us, I think there are probably very few of us who would not want to be seen in these terms. Educated, environmentally conscious, sophisticated, well-travelled, altruistic. That's a suite of ambitions I think we could all aspire to. And that's it really. That's all I'm really going to say. We have an opportunity, we have a window to get rid of lead, to put game shooting on a more secure footing. Because basically, if we get the lead out, I think game shooting has a future. As I've said several times during this presentation, we know that people like game. We think there's headroom in that market. If you take out the scientific argument, if you take out the argument around the toxicology of lead, then you reduce arguments about shooting to moral ones. So are you against shooting or are you for shooting? And when you do that, you can win a moral argument. You can't win an argument when the scientific weight of opinion is against what you're doing because you are spreading poison in the environment. We have to act quickly. We don't have 5 years. We really don't. The scientific case and the scientists working on the case against lead, these are not, in general, these are in general not people who want to stop shooting. They are people who want to ban lead. People are worried about the environment. People are worried about anything that harms the environment, anything that has impact on the environment. People are concerned. Lead has got to go, else there'll be no market for game. Consumers will lose their appetite very quickly for a product that actually could have a great future as a healthy protein. But the most encouraging thing is that the outcome is in all our hands. We can fight for the status quo. We can stick our head in the sands. We can say we're not going to change. We can keep buying lead. We can keep shooting lead. You can buy 100,000 rounds of lead to store up for the future. That's fine. The decision is in all our hands. But if you do that and you refuse to accept change, then change will be imposed upon you. And there will be, in the end, no market for the game that we shoot. And if there is no market for the game that we shoot, then there's probably no argument to support why we do it, at least on a commercial basis. And that's something I think everybody really ought to bear in mind. That's it for me. I really hope I've not come across as too doomy and gloomy. What I'm really trying to say is that what we do next is really important, and we can do this ourselves, but we don't, as I said, have 5 years to do it. Thank you for your time this morning. I'm happy to take any questions. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much indeed.